In the gilded halls of 19th century Europe, beneath chandeliers that shimmered like frozen tears, royalty danced, not in joy, but in denial. Behind every polished smile and every gloved hand lay secrets that could destroy entire empires. And among those secrets was the tragedy of one young princess, a girl who entered her marriage believing in love, but left it marked forever by betrayal, disease, and death. Her name was Princess Stephanie of Belgium. Pause. Distant echo of waltz music fades into silence. Born in 1864 to King Leopold II of Belgium, Stephanie grew up surrounded by ceremony, duty, and dreams of royal destiny. But like so many daughters of Europe's crowned heads, her future wasn't hers to choose. In the year 1881, at just 17, Stephanie's fate was sealed. She was chosen to marry Crown Prince Rudolph of Austria-Hungary, the only son of Emperor Franz Joseph and Empress Elizabeth, the famed Sisi. It was a match designed not for love, but for power, a marriage meant to bind two empires, not two hearts. Soft echo of wedding bells, somber rather than joyous. The wedding was magnificent. Vienna gleamed with gold and ceremony. Carriages rolled through snow-dusted streets as nobles toasted the new royal union. To the public, it was a fairy tale. But behind palace walls, that fairy tale was already beginning to decay. Act I, a marriage of shadows. When Stephanie entered the Habsburg court, she found herself in a world where protocols suffocated humanity. Every gesture, every word, every step was dictated by ancient rules. She was no longer a girl. She was property, a vessel for heirs. Her husband, Crown Prince Rudolph, was handsome, intelligent, and charismatic, the kind of man history books might have adored, if not for the darkness that consumed him. Raised under the iron discipline of his father and the emotional absence of his mother, Rudolph had grown bitter, unstable, and dangerously unpredictable at first. Stephanie tried to see the man beneath the crown. She wanted to believe love could tame the isolation of royal life. But within months, the truth revealed itself. Rudolph was not a husband. He was a tormentor. He drank excessively, sought comfort in mistresses, and spent nights in Vienna's brothels, while his young wife lay alone in the cold chambers of the Hofburg Palace. And within a year of their marriage, he committed a betrayal so cruel it would shape the rest of Stephanie's life. He infected her with syphilis. Short silence, heartbeat sound fades in softly. A disease whispered about in the corridors of power, never spoken aloud. For a woman, a princess, it was not just an illness, it was a sentence. Syphilis in the 1880s was a slow, merciless executioner, attacking the body and mind, destroying beauty, fertility, and hope. For Stephanie, it meant she could no longer bear children. The one duty demanded of her to produce an heir had been stolen, and the man who had done it felt no remorse. Rudolph continued his reckless life, his affairs growing bolder, his cruelty sharper. He blamed her for his unhappiness, mocked her pain, and isolated her from allies at court. Stephanie's life became a silent prison, a palace filled with whispers she dared not answer, and rules she dared not break. Music lowers. The sound of a ticking clock underscores the narration. Every smile she gave in public was a mask. Every royal portrait, a lie dot behind that perfect image of imperial grace, stood a woman slowly dying from both disease and humiliation. Act 2. The cracks beneath the crown. By the late 1880s, Rudolph's behavior had become a matter of scandal, even in the tight-lipped Austrian court. His political views had grown radical, defying his father, questioning the monarchy itself. He surrounded himself with revolutionaries, artists, and mistresses searching for meaning in chaos. Among them was a name that would soon stain history in blood: Baroness Mary Vatsera. Mary was 17, young, romantic, and naive. To her, the crown prince wasn't a broken man. He was a tragic hero. To Rudolph, she was a distraction from despair to the empire. She was a disaster waiting to happen. Their affair began in secrecy, but quickly spiraled into obsession. Rudolph promised her eternity. He promised escape, but what he truly offered was death. Music darkens, deep cello notes. In the cold winter of 1889, the Crown Prince retreated to a hunting lodge at Merling, a secluded refuge in the Vienna woods. He invited Mary to join him. The servants believed they were going for a quiet stay, but the truth was darker than anyone imagined. Rudolph was unraveling. He was paranoid, sleepless, and consumed by thoughts of death. Letters written to Mary in the days before the tragedy reveal his chilling state of mind. He spoke of dying together, of escaping a world that had betrayed them both, and on the morning of January 30th, 1889, when the servants entered his room, they found a nightmare. Crown Prince Rudolph was dead. Mary Vetzera lay beside him, a single gunshot wound through her skull. He had shot her, and then himself. Silence, just the faint crackle of wind. The empire trembled, the heir to the Habsburg throne gone, the monarchy's future shattered. Act 3. The Widow and the Scandal in Vienna. Chaos erupted. Court officials scrambled to hide the truth, desperate to preserve the dynasty's image. At first, they claimed Rudolph had died of a heart attack, then that Mary's presence had been accidental. But the truth could not be buried. The press soon revealed everything. The affair, the murder, the suicide. And in the midst of that firestorm stood one woman, Princess Stephanie, at just 24. She was widowed, diseased, and disgraced, blamed by many for the tragedy she had suffered most from. Some whispered that she had driven Rudolph to madness. Others suggested she had known of his plans. But few spoke of what she had endured in silence: the betrayal, the infection, the humiliation. The monarchy closed ranks. Stephanie was not to speak. Her pain was to be erased, like she had never existed. Sound of heavy palace doors closing. The Habsburgs stripped her of dignity, of position, of identity. Her pension was cut to force her departure. Once paraded as the empire's radiant future, she became a living reminder of its corruption and decay. Friends vanished. Letters went unanswered. Invitations stopped coming. She was, in every sense, banished without exile. The empire she had served and suffered for discarded her like a broken ornament, and as she faded into obscurity, the same machinery of power that had destroyed her husband's mind and her own body continued to turn, unpunished, unexamined. Soft piano melody, melancholy but rising in tone. But history has a way of revealing what palaces try to conceal. Behind the silks and ceremonies of imperial Vienna was a world built on exploitation, where women like Stephanie were pawns, traded between dynasties, silenced by shame, and sacrificed for the appearance of order. Her story, though buried under decades of royal propaganda, remains a mirror, reflecting the cruelty of systems that valued power more than humanity. And yet, even in her suffering, Princess Stephanie would find a way to rise again. For her story was not over. Fade out, the sound of turning pages. After the tragedy of Merling, the empire mourned its prince, but not his widow. Stephanie of Belgium, once the daughter of a king, the wife of a crown prince, and the future empress of Austria, became invisible in a world built on perfection. She was a living flaw. The Habsburg court never forgave her, not for anything she had done, but for what she represented: lost, disease, failure. While the empire moved on, its widowed princess was quietly erased from history's golden portraits. Act 1. The Widow in exile. Vienna's palaces no longer opened their doors for her. The carriages that once carried her through cheering crowds now passed without even a glance, she was 24, already a widow, already discarded. The disease Rudolph had given her continued to ravage her body in secret. But worse than the pain was the silence of exile while still living inside her gilded cage. She was forbidden to speak publicly about her husband's death, forbidden to remarry without imperial permission, forbidden to leave Austria without the emperor's consent. Every letter she sent was censored, every movement watched. Every visitor recorded, and through it all, her father, King Leopold II of Belgium, turned away, a man whose heart was colder than the marble of his palaces. He refused her pleas for support. He called her a disappointment and told his court that his daughter was unfit to represent the crown. Distant thunder rolls, slow crescendo, but Stephanie refused to break. If the empires of Europe would not remember her as a princess, she would become something far more dangerous, a survivor. Act 2. The second marriage. In the late 1890s, Stephanie found herself drawn to a man unlike any she had ever known. Count Lemare Lanja, a Hungarian nobleman and diplomat. He was not a prince, not a power seeker. He was quiet, kind, and sincere in his letters. He spoke not of duty or empire, but of peace, of nature, of love, and for the first time, Stephanie began to feel alive again. But the court called it scandal, a widowed crown princess marrying a mere count. To the aristocracy, it was treason of class. Emperor Franz Joseph was furious. He stripped Stephanie of her imperial title, her rank, and her privileges. The Habsburgs turned their backs. Her father disowned her entirely. Soft piano chords, hint of melancholy hope. In 1900, she married Elamor in a small private ceremony, far from Vienna's marble halls. No kings attended. No trumpets played. Only a handful of friends witnessed the fallen princess reclaim her life. She was no longer her imperial and royal highness, the crown princess of Austria. She was now Countess Stephanie Launier, a woman without a crown, but finally with a heart of her own. For the first time in her life, she could walk through a garden without being watched, speak without rehearsing, smile without pretending. In the countryside of Hungary, in a small estate surrounded by forests and fields, Stephanie and Elamor built a quiet refuge. They adopted stray animals, hosted travelers, and lived simply, far from the suffocating etiquette of court life. Gentle bird song and faint laughter fade in, then slowly fade out. And yet, no matter how far she went, the ghosts of her past followed. Act 3. The weight of legacies. Europe edged toward the chaos of the 20th century. Stephanie began to see her life differently, not as tragedy, but as testimony. She began to write. In 1935, she published her memoirs, Ich, Saltkaiser and Werden, I Was to Be Empress. The book was explosive in it. She revealed everything the Habsburgs had tried to hide: Rudolph's affairs, his madness, his disease, and the hypocrisy of the royal courts. She wrote not with bitterness, but with brutal honesty. Her words were sharp, painful, and human. A crown can weigh heavier than chains. I was raised for greatness, but greatness devoured me. The world was shocked for the first time. A royal woman had lifted the veil on imperial corruption and told the truth. The Habsburgs denounced her. Vienna's society called her a traitor to royalty. But common people, readers, women, the forgotten, admired her courage. They saw in her story a reflection of their own silent suffering. A woman forced to live by rules made by men, a voice finally breaking the silence. Background shifts, old record crackle with faint applause. And though her book was banned in Austria, it spread across Europe, translated, whispered, passed from hand to hand. The words of the princess who dared to speak became legend. But time, as always, was merciless. Act 4. The Empire collapses in 1914. The shot that killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo began a chain that would destroy the world she once belonged to. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, that vast, glittering machine that had controlled half of Europe, began to crumble. The palaces where she once walked were now filled with refugees. The nobles who once mocked her fled into exile. The same emperor who had stripped her of rank watched his empire die before his eyes. And through it all, Stephanie remained in Hungary with her husband, quiet, unbroken. She watched the monarchy that had ruined her collapse under its own weight. Low strings rumble like distant thunder, then fade to silence. When the First World War ended, there were no more emperors, no more crowns, no more Habsburg power. The great empire had fallen, and the woman it had once crushed remained. Irony, it seemed, had a cruel sense of justice. Act V. The last years. By the 1930s, Stephanie and Elmer were old. Their estate, though modest, was warm and alive with stories. They had no children, but countless stray dogs and cats roamed freely. Loved his family. In photographs from those years, she is almost unrecognizable. The girl who once wore diamonds, now dressed in plain linen, hair silver, eyes calm. The disease that had once threatened to destroy her had receded, leaving only scars, both visible and invisible. And yet, there was peace. Neighbors called her the gentle countess. Villagers came to her for advice, for medicine, for kindness. She read, wrote letters, tended gardens, and sometimes spoke softly of a time when she was almost empress. Soft rain sound calm, reflective. In 1945, as the Second World War reached Hungary, Soviet troops advanced across the countryside. The world had changed again. Violently, many aristocrats fled, but Stephanie refused to leave. She said simply, "I have already lost everything once. What more can they take from me?" She stayed in her crumbling home with Elmer, refusing to abandon the land that had given her peace. Supplies ran short, electricity failed, food was scarce, and yet, she never complained. She told the few who visited, "Do not pity me. I have lived long enough to see truth win." In 1945, at the age of 8, Princess Stephanie of Belgium, the forgotten empress, died quietly in her sleep. Beside her was the man she had loved. Around her were the woods she had planted. No soldiers, no priests, no courtiers, only silence and peace. Her grave, a simple stone cross, bears no royal title, only her name, a final act of defiance against the crowns that had destroyed her youth. Music swells soft strings, then fades into silence. Act 6. Legacy of the uncrowned today. Her name is rarely spoken in the halls of history. Her father, King Leopold II, is remembered for the horrors of his Congo Empire. Her husband, Crown Prince Rudolph, for the scandal of Merling. But Stephanie, the woman in between, became a ghost of two tragedies. And yet, her story is not one of failure, it is one of survival. She was the living proof that even in the darkest corners of monarchy, where women were traded like contracts and silenced like crimes, a single voice could still echo. The empire that erased her name is gone. The thrones have turned to museums, but her words remain. "I was to be empress," she wrote, "but instead, I learned to be human." Soft instrumental outro minor to major progression. And perhaps that was the greater crown. Closing narration for voiceover ending. Low whispering tone, fading out with strings. History remembers kings and conquerors, but sometimes